Welcome to Mid-Century Living, your weekly nostalgia podcast about the best of technology and culture from the mid-20th century.
Welcome back to Mid-Century Living, the show where we talk all about the best of the mid-20th century and how to add the vintage vibes to your modern life. We're your hosts, Gonzalo.
And Jackie, thank you for joining us today. And today we're making it back to Manhattan to visit the offices of Sterling Cooper, and we're watching episode 2 of Mad Men. So, Gonzalo, what were your thoughts heading into episode 2?
I was just ready. I wanted to see what happened, and I wanted to see if there was anything more like family life wise. Because at the end of the first episode, the big twist, the big reveal is that, gasp, Don Draper is married and has kids. And is actually a Burbian guy. So I was like, I wonder if this is going to play a part in this episode. And spoilers, it might.
So yeah, spoiler alert for episode 2 of Mad Men, everybody. For those just catching up or just tuning in, I've seen Mad Men 8 times. I don't know. I lost count. Gonzalo has never seen it before ever in his life until now. So
Yes.
We're going to recap episode 2 of season 1 of Mad Men, Gonzalo being his thoughts as a first-time watcher and my thoughtful commentary as trying really hard not to spoil it or to get too excited about anything, but I have thoughts. I have thoughts and opinions.
Yes. So we're going to jump straight into the scene by scene. If you want more info on the actual series, feel free to listen to our first episode about Mad Men, which includes a little bit about like the actual show before we do the scene by scene.
Yes, so episode 2 is titled Ladies' Room, and it first aired on July 25th, 2007. So we open with Don and Betty having dinner with Roger and Mona. And I don't think we know Betty and Mona's names yet, but
No.
It is Roger, who we met in season 1, or episode 1, and his wife having dinner with Don and his wife. And we open at a restaurant where they are making Caesar salad at the table.
Also on the menu, whiskey for Don, and a martini and a cigarette for Roger. And because they're having salads, the waiter comes by with a ground pepper, black pepper, peppering machine.
Grinder,
thank you. And I had to laugh because of a comedian bit where he goes, "Enjoy your magic salad." It's like you're waving this one in
this
front
magic
of you.
one, yeah, this like comically large pepper grinder over the salad. Yeah. So they try to talk and they try to ask questions about Don's past, but he won't give any details at all and just changes the subject. But at that point, that's when the women get up to go to the ladies' room, and we see Betty's dress, one of the most famous dresses she wears in the entire series. It is this floral dress with a cummerbund and a bubble hem. It is, for those wondering, it was designed by Will Steinman Original and sold by Ward's through their mail order catalog in 1959, which makes sense for Betty Draper because this first season was set in 1960, so it makes sense she would have just bought it. In the original dress design, this is a true vintage dress she's wearing, and when the dress came out, it not only came with the lavender blue cummerbund that Betty's wearing, but it also came in pink and spring green. There are photos online. A couple people I follow on Instagram actually own this dress, and a similar but not the exact same dress was also worn by a background extra in season 3, episode 1 of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and Gertie, my favorite pattern designer, recreated this dress for her line Charm Patterns, if you want to make your own, and she called it the Betty dress, and we'll put a link in the show notes.
Nice.
So then we cut to Betty and Mona in the ladies' room. The scene transitions smoothly into the ladies' room, and the focus is on Betty's purse and her hands. Betty's having trouble with her hands and has Mona touch up her lipstick for her because her hands go numb. Betty kind of like reveals a little anxiety she's having and mentions that her mother died recently.
And right after that, like literally like half a beat later, the bathroom attendant interrupts them and is like, "Hey, can you all get out of the way so that other people can use the mirror?" Which makes sense. It totally makes sense that the bathroom attendant would say that. But like, she's got ears. She should have heard that Betty just said my mom died. Like, give it a beat. Give it a second. Let Mona like say something in return and reply. I mean, so anyway, but talking about bathroom attendants, they were not really an invention of the mid 20th century. They actually started in the late 19th, but they became very common in the early and mid 20th, especially in urban high-end hotels and restaurants in the USA. They are meant to keep the bathrooms tidy and help the guests of the restaurant or hotel. and I'm not a fan. I just don't know how to deal. I understand why they're there, but like I'm like I can wash my hands and get my own soap. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of like I can hit my own elevator buttons too, but it was a job.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the elevator one's a little bit more better. Okay with me, I guess.
But yeah, all of that's kind of summed up in the the comment that one of the attendants makes is, if those purses get any smaller, we're gonna starve.
Yeah.
So then we cut to Don and Betty driving home.
So this time we get a cinematographic, I don't think it's said correctly, scene change. The door of the bathroom closes, and the darkness that's created by the door closing becomes a darkness outside of the car as Don and Betty drive home. This is like the only time we get a really good transition
Aw.
between scenes. Betty is not wearing a seatbelt, and she's actually sitting in the center of the car because Don's car has a bench seat. Bench seats were very popular from the early motors, right, from the 1912s, 1910s, through the mid 20th. In the early 20th century, cars offered a practical way to accommodate more passengers, the center in the front.
Mm-hmm.
Post World War II, however, bucket seats began to be seen more in the cars, replacing bench seats, and by the late 1960s / early 1970s, they were essentially gone. This could be part of a really interesting episode of like car things we lost in the mid-century or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah, Betty asked Dawn to slow down because she blames the food she has. I think she says something like lobster Newburg and gimlets are not friends or something like that.
yes. And then she suppresses a burp.
I think it was a hiccup, like she's drunk like a cartoon character is. You know how like they used to hiccup in the movie?
Yes.
But anyway, Betty was asking some more follow-up questions, and Don clearly does not like talking about himself. He says, I was raised to see it as a sin of pride to go on about yourself like that. Oh, I think he was talking about Roger in that moment, who was going on and on about his life and his struggles.
Yeah. Betty rolls on the window for air, though we don't see what she does, and it could have been very well to puke.
Maybe. Poor thing. So then scene 4 is Don and Betty in bed.
And the scene changes, but the audio begins as the last scene with Betty resting her head on the car door / open window. It's weird. I thought she was talking in the car. I didn't realize that her mouth was not moving, but the audio is for the next scene, but the visual is still the car scene, and I thought it was a little odd. Don and Betty are in bed, and they have a really cool, thick, upholstered bed frame or bed back. I don't know what it's called.
I'm glad you noticed that it's a headboard, that the upholstered headboard. I really like it.
Yeah. Now, upholstered beds date back to like the 17th century. Don and Betty is just a great turquoise color, which is very much MCM. Turquoise with its bright and cheerful tone brings a sense of joy and energy to the space, which aligns with the playful and optimistic nature of mid-century design. It's often paired with other colors like black, teal, mustard, or shades of green in MCM design. And it was a very popular color during the mid-century period, especially in the 1940s, alongside other vibrant and muted shades like teal, lime, pink, pale blue, and yellow.
Oh, so this is when Betty asks, did you ever have a nanny? I never asked you. And Don will still not say a single thing about his childhood, even to his wife.
Yes.
Don's reply is actually, if it's not politics, religion, or sex, why talk about it? He says to his wife. Like, I get that at a cocktail party, but Jesus.
Yeah.
Anyway.
He says this and then, like, puts out his cigarette because, of course, they're smoking in bed. And then
they start making out. He's just trying to distract her from talking about himself, I guess. But they did just have a nice drinky night out on the town.
Yeah. Anyway, Betty unbuttons his pajamas, which, like, who wears buttons on PJs? I feel like they would be really uncomfortable.
I think all the pajamas had buttons back then.
Yeah, but, like, I don't know. I sleep on my stomach. So, like, having buttons, like, hard plastic there is just going to get annoying.
That would get annoying. I feel like back then, the only pullover shirts, like, it's like underwear t-shirts, like undershirts, or your shirt had buttons.
Yeah.
But then it cuts to scene 4.5. I wasn't sure if this counted as a whole scene or not. Betty smoking in bed at maybe sunrise. Don's already asleep.
Yeah, Don's asleep and like Betty's sitting up in bed and smoking, because of course. And I noticed that they are actually in opposite sides of the bed than the previous scene, which I find weird.
Interesting note. I didn't notice that.
Because here's the thing, and here's my reasoning. Before they did anything in the bed, they were going to sleep. So presumably they went on their side of the bed. And after Hanky Panky, they would have returned to their side of the bed to sleep in.
Interesting.
Anyway, on Betty's bedside table is a great example of an MCM bedside table accoutrement. It's a clock radio. And this particular one is a cream color radio. It looks suspiciously like the GE C585 AM FM radio clock. And here, if it is, it's kind of where we get our first timeline error of the episode, because clock radios became common in the bedroom in the late 1960s and early 1970s, which is a little bit later than the time this show takes place.
Whoopsies.
Yeah. Actually, it was in 1968 with the introduction of the Sony Dream Machine, model 8FC59, that the real estate next to the bed became highly valuable. Sure, other clock radios were common, but the Sony was like the coveted one. So if this is a GE one, it could point to a still evolving middle class Don Draper.
Yeah, and this is when she says who's in there and looks at Don while he's asleep. And I think you're right. She's on the right side of the bed, the side table with the clock radio. Yeah, that's usually Don's side of the bed, so they did switch. Her side of the bed is the side of the bed that she was sitting on when they were chatting earlier.
Yeah.
But anyway. Then we move to scene 5, an actual scene. Fade transition to Joan and Peggy walking through the office at Sterling Cooper. And I guess Peggy's outfit is better today because Joan says something like congratulatory and says next step is accessories. And also, Peggy mentions she gets her first paycheck and she's thrilled with her $35 a week. I realize now we need like a correction corner that last episode I said she made something higher. But I must have been remembering her salary in a few years because, yikes, I don't remember it was as low as $35 a week.
35 in 1960 is about $378 today. So it's still not a lot of money.
No, not a lot of money at all. But she's thrilled. And she's like so excited about it.
Yeah. We also have a possible talent error here because in the background of the scene is a coffee cart complete with the urn and the red cups and muffins, which we'll see again in a little bit in the episode. But coffee carts inside the office were not common in the 1960s. They would have been located outside until the late 20th century when they became more commonplace inside.
Interesting. Yeah. I think probably they would have had one in the lobby, maybe. But yeah, maybe.
Yeah, maybe the lobby, but not like in the bullpen.
Right. Well, they do in this show because it comes up a lot.
Yes.
So then Joan and Peggy go into the bathroom and someone is already in there crying. Peggy cares, but Joan does not, and they do nothing to help her.
Which I want to say something about this. I'll say it later on.
Okay, we'll wait. Then we get to scene 6 where Ken, Sal, Paul, Kinsey, who I'm just going to refer to as Kinsey because for the most part in the show they just call him Kinsey, and Dale are in Don's office.
And this is an abrupt scene change, like to Don's office where they're at. And they're discussing their new client, Gillette, and their new spray deodorant. Actually, it's Ken talking about the new product, the Right Guard spray deodorant. It's actually now owned by Thriving Brands LLC after being sold to the Dial Corporation after Gillette was sold to Procter & Gamble, which means that this is a real product and a real client.
Mm-hmm.
So this product was introduced in 1960, so no timeline error here, but it was a real thing. Right Guard was actually the first aerosol deodorant. In the mid-1960s, commercials for the Right Guard featured a man looking into a mirror to see another man looking back. This was played by comedian Chuck McCann, and he would say, "Hi, guy," back at the confused guy who, after a conversation, would like turn confused and be like, "Mona," calling for his wife. So I wonder if Dong will come up with this idea. That's what I have as my as I'm watching commentary.
That's funny.
Yeah, but we'll put a link to this video, to that commercial in the show notes because it's actually pretty funny.
Ken thinks that basically that this product is for the modern guy. He's reading the label. It says do not puncture or incinerate. And then everyone turns on Ken and they try to spray the deodorant on him. Oh, and they make this horrible comment. Someone says, I think it was Dale says, just pretend it's prom night and you can be the girl, while they're like ripping open his shirt and pushing him onto the table to try to like spray the deodorant on his armpits.
Yeah, it's so weird, so cringy.
Right? I mean, we've said it a lot last episode. These are just like straight out of college frat dudes. Like it is a very bro-y vibe in the writers, the creatives in this company.
Yeah.
For now.
Dun dun. Peggy, though, barges in saying, "Mr. Draper, I've been buzzing you." And then
we meet Bert Cooper, whose first line is, "I always thought it was Sterling who was responsible for the Navy attitude around this place because he's watching the guys make total fools of themselves with the Right Guard." I think actually Don makes a funny joke about it being a brassiere account because Ken's not wearing a shirt. But surprise! Bert Cooper is played by Robert Morse, who won the Tony for Best Actor in How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying in 1961. You mentioned this musical last episode, and I told you to hold that thought, and this is why.
Nice.
Scene 7 is an informal meeting of the partners right outside Don's office immediately after that scene. That's why Bert came in to get Don. They're discussing advertising for the upcoming presidential election. Sterling Cooper want to go after the Nixon account. Don doesn't want to go after Nixon because their PR firm was already having a good hold on him. And he says, why chase a girl who doesn't want to get caught? And Bert says this interesting thing about how these last 8 years have been good to us because they've been good to Procter & Gamble.
Yes, which kind of goes back to the whole deodorant thing, because that would be their client that they're working for, but time and error because Gillette owns Right Guard at that point, not yet Procter & Gamble.
Though that could have been, and if that was another client, if they had Gillette and Procter & Gamble, there would be a conflict and it wouldn't be able to have both. That's a good thing. But I guess what he's basically saying is that they work for companies and the companies doing better means they do better because they're the ones paying the bills.
Yep. But also, as he walks away, is Cooper only wearing socks?
Yep. He's a bit of an eccentric.
Okay.
Basically, it's everyone's breaking up after this meeting for lunch break. And Peggy takes out the saddest bag lunch I've ever seen in my entire life. It's like a moldy banana and a sandwich wrapped in like wax paper. And Joan says, come with me. That sandwich is making me sad. And takes her to lunch. So scene 8, we are in the break room. It's crowded. Everyone's smoking. And Joan and Peggy run into Harry, Ken, and Dale in the break room. And the men offer to take them to lunch. But before that, the guys were reading and joking about a postcard that Pete sent from his honeymoon, which is important. Peggy asks about Pete and seems sad that he's having a good honeymoon, which, if you recall correctly, they had a special moment together at the end of the last episode. Also,
I don't want her catching feelings for this guy. That's my thought. That's my 2 cents on this.
I am holding my tongue. Also, yes. I think my theory is that Joan walked Peggy through the break room on purpose because she knew that if they just, casually strolled through there and any of the guys saw them, they would offer to take them to lunch.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
I think that was her, sneaky plan. Oh, yeah, because Peggy brought her lunch because she brings her lunch until the end of the month. So Joan was basically, I think, kind of showing Peggy how to get a free lunch.
Yeah. So, and that takes us to the diner.
Mm-hmm. Scene 9, lunch at a diner. It's a quick scene change.
And the men are making dirty jokes trying to figure out if Peggy's single by being super creepy.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, they're talking, I don't know how they got to the jacket size, but one goes, can I interest you in a 42 long? And another guy replies, that's not a suit size.
Ugh. Yeah, then Ken really goes for it, fully hitting on Peggy on her way out the door, but Peggy and Joan get out of there. Nothing much happens in the scene except for continually establishing that the guys that work in the office are gross. But
yeah, I don't know if that's just culture of the mid-century office when it comes to their demographic, but
they do get a little better, but it's very in your face. And yeah.
No, let's go back to the office. Actually, at Peggy's desk, which is the next half scene change really thing, which is interestingly because it looks different than it did in the pilot episode. Remember the set change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did. Yeah, so this time they are not in New York anymore; they're in LA. So they recreated the set on a soundstage.
Yeah, so it maybe something that no one notices, but my eye went to this. The desk is positioned in a incorrect angle to the door of Don Draper's office, than it was in the previous episode.
Funny observation.
Kinsey gives Peggy some of his copywork to give to Dawn and tells Peggy she can look at it if she wants. And she does, but we don't see if she sees anything.
So then we move to scene 10, back in Austining. Betty and Francine are gossiping in the kitchen.
Yes, it's an abrupt scene change that takes us to the Draper house to see Betty gossiping with a lady who we don't know her name until Betty says it. It's Francine Hansen. They're both smoking because, of course.
Gonzalo wrote in here that Betty is wearing a horrendously frilly dress. She's wearing a house dress, I think, or a robe.
I don't know.
She's still got her curlers in.
It just, I don't know. They're discussing the president of the PTA who is obsessed with nutrition, but you, quote, wouldn't know it by looking at her, which is just some light gossip.
Mm-hmm.
They also discuss a lady named Helen Bishop, a divorcee, moving down the street into the Dutch colonial. And she's got a 9-year-old boy and a baby. At first, the two ladies seem to be empathetic towards her having to worry about money at their age, but then they are threatened by a single woman moving in and around their husbands. And does Betty know that her husband cheats on him? Like, there's like a sad face she puts in this scene because she knows she's not the only woman now in the street. Like, she could be divorcee with kids if she's not careful, and like Dawn drops her.
You're giving her much credit, or maybe not thinking about how good a liar Dawn is.
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't think. I feel like at this point, I feel like Betty is too innocent to be with a man like Don, even though she does not know who Don really is.
But we don't either.
But we don't either. But we do.
Yeah, we know
to an
he's
extent.
cheating, but I don't think I genuinely believe at this point she has no idea. But I think Francine's kind of putting ideas in her head that, like, men could cheat by being worried about the single woman moving into the neighborhood and, like, swooping up on all their husbands. Like, I think it didn't occur to her until that moment, and that's why she made that face.
I know, but like, I don't know. It's like cheating such a huge thing in the mid-century. Like,
I think it was actually, like, so widespread that, like, men just didn't come home sometimes. But I think back then they're just like, oh, men are working late. Like, and maybe it was partially a don't ask, don't tell situation. But maybe it was also the women just didn't know. I don't know. I think in this case, Betty genuinely has no idea and only starts thinking about it when Francine introduces that idea.
Oh, okay.
I think she just starts thinking about it now when Francine's like bringing up how threatening it could be to have a single woman living in a neighborhood surrounded by all these husbands. Oh, and then we get to the best part of the scene, which is when Sally Draper is playing with her friend and she runs into the kitchen with a plastic bag hanging over an entire torso. Like,
yes.
And Betty turns to her and says, if the clothes from that dry cleaning bag are on the floor of my closet, you're going to be a very sorry young lady.
Yes, it's like she's more concerned with her clothes being wrinkled and her child suffocating.
And this, my friends, is why they started adding the "this is not a toy" warning to the plastic bags.
Which those warning signs on plastic bags, particularly dry cleaning bags, were not common in the 1950s. They were there was some public outcry after some deaths due to the plastic bags, but that was not yet mainstream. In the 1960s, when this show is set, I believe that Betty Draper would have been aware of the potential choking hazard, even if she probably didn't find it too concerning. The warnings became more prevalent with the passing of the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, or the CPSC, in 1973.
Thank you for doing that research.
Yeah. And then we get another abrupt scene change, this time from the street side, looking at the back of a vehicle, and I tried my hardest to find out the vehicle, and I could not. But the scene is from the inside of Betty Draper's car, which she is driving with the kids. The kids are not wearing seatbelts, but the car she is driving is a 1957 Ford Country sedan.
Cute.
Which is funny because it's not a sedan, it's a wagon.
Yeah.
It's actually a full-size wagon manufactured by Ford from 1952 to 1974, and it was a mid-trim vehicle. So not too fancy, but also she's not slumming it in this vehicle. It sold better than its expansive next-tier version, the Country Squire. Now, because it's a model year prior to 1966, it does not have the magic door gate, which if you've seen old station wagons with a back door, like the part without the glass goes down like a tailgate in a pickup truck, or swings, that is the magic door gate.
Oh, okay.
Which was an invention of Ford.
Yeah, that's what I think about when I think about station wagons, actually. I didn't know that they used to not have those.
Yeah.
So this is why I'm thinking she only just now is getting these ideas because of her reaction to seeing so she drives by the divorcee moving in, and when she sees her, her hands go numb, and she loses control of the car and crashes into a bird bath in someone's front yard.
Yes.
So clearly she's having some sort of response, like an emotional response that's turning into her hands going numb. Like, I think that's why I think, like, she wouldn't have even thought of that if Francine hadn't brought it up, because of her reaction in the scene. Like, I think it's just too strong for her to already have ideas, you know?
Yeah.
But anyway, so the kids who were not wearing seatbelts and were just, like, loose in the back seat slide off the seat and onto the floor, but they're fine.
Yeah, they laugh it off. They're like, oh, hi, this is fun. Mom crashed.
But Betty is like freaking out and makes sure the kids are okay, and then slinks out onto the floor outside the car.
Yeah.
Poor Betty.
And we get a fade transition here. It takes us to Mitch's apartment, and Don and Mitch finishing up some private time, which is weird because this fade transition fades out of the scene on Betty Draper, and it's overimposed on Don on top of another woman, which I do not think was an accidental thing. But they are on a bed, and they have some very MCM green shirts. Not shirts. They have a very MCM green sheets.
Good sheets.
Yes, and as soon as they're done, Don reaches down for his lighter because cigarettes.
So Midge got a television, and Don is being super weird about it.
Yes, the TV itself is a little small. It looks like a 12 inches, which I wrote whenever I saw it before I did in research, with a handle on top and little bunny ears.
Yeah, she's being very direct. Like, if you want to ask the question, just ask it. And so she, like, where'd you get the TV is the question she's trying to get him to ask. Someone gave it to her. And is John jealous of the TV, or that another possible suitor gave her the TV as a present? Or does he not like that she has a life outside of their relationship, even though he is also married with kids and clearly has a life outside of their relationship? So, Don.
Yeah.
Don
and
sucks.
Also, she's... Yeah. Did you say Don sucks?
Yeah.
Also, she's supposed to be like this anti-consumerist and kind of a hippie, so why would she follow the trend and buy a TV?
Someone gave her the TV.
True, but yes, but still.
She asked Don if he's seen this thing called People Are Funny.
Yeah, this
which
is a TV
you
game
actually
show.
Googled, and was a real show?
Yeah, it's a real show that ran from 1954 to 1961, in which contestants were asked to carry out stunts. I've got a clip that we'll put on the show notes.
So Don's being such a weirdo about the TV, so she just throws it out the window and hopefully doesn't murder anybody.
Yes, though there is a very funny "hey" from outside. She runs back out the window to check it. But like, that's such a weird response. Okay, your lover doesn't want the TV. I know. I'll just throw it out the window. Like, what?
I think that's kind of leaning into, so maybe it is more like, you're supposed to be above this, Midge. Why do you have a TV? And so she's like, yeah, I am above it. See how much I don't care about this television? And throws it out the window.
Yeah, like put it in the hallway and someone else will take it.
So,
Anyway.
Scene 13. We're back home at the Draper house. The kids are eating dinner.
Yeah, we had an abrupt scene change to the Draper house, where Betty is serving fish fingers and what looks like canned vegetables, peas, green beans, carrots, and corn in the world's ugliest plates. And also milk with dinner and Heinz ketchup.
To go with their fish sticks.
Yeah, but nothing.
I cannot
nothing on
imagine
the table
anything
matches.
worse than dipping a fish stick in ketchup. That sounds horrible.
Yeah, no. Their kitchen's also not the prettiest. I would guess it's not quite MCM either. It's got ugly wooden cabinets, although it has some great mid-century appliances, like a double oven that is like a pale yellow green, and also some stainless steel counter edges, which is very mid-century.
I actually love their plaid wallpaper. I do not like the colonial scrolly cabinets so much.
Yeah, I don't like the cabinets. That's really what I don't like about it.
I love the plaid wallpaper, and I have her letter sorter. She has this like mail sorter, this like metal thing hanging on the wall, and I have that hanging in my kitchen.
Nice.
And also she has, in some scenes, she has Betty Crocker's Hostess cookbook on display on her little like cookbook holder, and I have that cookbook too, also because I'm just collecting Betty Draper kitchen stuff. I really wish I could wallpaper the kitchen, but that's fine.
In time.
Oh yeah, you wrote down ugly wooden cabinets.
Yeah, so Don arrives. Betty's looking very odd. The kids blurt out that they went to the hospital.
Betty says the kids are fine, and Don makes an excuse for them not being able to get a hold of him at the office, but we know this is because he was with Midge.
Yes. Don immediately also asks how the car is. He says he hates the way Betty drives, and she just kind of takes it. Like, I guess it's like par for the course for mid-20th man versus woman interactions there. But it's weird. Then their daughter asks if she can be dismissed to go watch Shirley Temple's Storybook, which is a show that ran from 1958 through 1961 and was a children's anthology series hosted by actress Shirley Temple. Also, she is most certainly not finished with dinner. There is plenty of food on her plate.
Mm-hmm. I guess Betty's not super concerned about the finish your plate sort of mentality thing, and we'll get more details on that later, why that might be the case. So the kids are gone. Betty tells Don that it was because of her hands again, and she suggests that maybe she needs to try therapy.
Yeah, and it's funny because like as she's saying this, like in my mind, I was like, she goes, "This it all happened so fast," and my immediate reaction was, "We're only going 25. How fast can that be?" And then right as I think that, Dawn says, "What, 20 miles an hour? That's not that fast."
So yeah, basically the doctors tell her that there was nothing physically wrong with her, and so they think that her hands going numb might be some sort of mental issue. And Dawn's response to her going to therapy is that doctors must love that they now have an answer for "I don't know what's wrong."
Yeah.
They leave. They don't really settle that discussion, and then we get to scene 14, which is Dawn and Betty getting ready for bed.
Yet another abrupt scene change from the kitchen to Dawn doing something very odd. This time, push-ups next to the bed. I never liked the idea of working out in the bedroom. I just feel it's weird. He gets to 12, but then he sees Betty take off her see-through robe and goes 98, 99, 100.
Fun fact about this exercise routine, Matt Weiner, the creator, wouldn't let any of the actors on the show go to the gym while they were filming because he didn't want, like, people didn't go to the gym and work out back then, and he wanted them to have realistic 1960s bodies. So no one was allowed to have muscles, pretty much.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Dawn also calls Betty Birdie.
Which is so cute. Isn't it cute? Anyway, I thought it was cute. Betty brings up therapy again, and Dawn says, "I always thought people saw psychiatrists when they're unhappy," and just like points out all of the stuff she has. Like, how could she possibly be unhappy when her life is so perfect? Which is just gaslighting.
Yeah. She very hesitantly replies, "Of course I'm happy," but she's clearly not. And then she lies awake.
Poor Betty.
So fate transitioned into the next scene, into Dawn's office, this time to a beautiful freestanding ashtray. Dawn's putting out a cigarette, and the room is quiet. And at first, I thought it was just Dawn in there, but when the camera pans out, it's everyone but Kinsey because he's late.
And he's late because someone threw themselves in front of the subway. He mentions it was an act of God that kept him from being there.
Yeah, which I don't know if I would trust that would be the reason that he was late. I think he was just late.
Yeah, maybe. But also I think it explains, I think it's brought up on purpose because of like how miserable people are.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I think
oh man, I didn't even make that connection.
Mm-hmm.
We just talked about how miserable Betty is, and
then Kinsey's like, "Yeah, someone just killed themselves in front of the train this morning."
Oh man.
Yep.
I did not make that connection. This is a brainstorming meeting, and there's some pitching going around for some alternate ideas for spray deodorant, and Dawn hates it. People are fearful of the future, and rockets equal bomb shelters. Life on other planets is scary. I think this is the showrunners speaking like, remember, it's the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
Dawn brings up the point of who will be buying this. He says it's a woman, a mother or wife doing the shopping at the drugstore. He's like, we should be asking ourselves what women want. And then there's another weird joke about making it sexual. I don't know, but I wish I had it.
Oh, yeah. And then Kinsey says, like, "I've stopped trying to figure out what they think." And then Dawn says, "Maybe I should stop paying you." Which is a good way to get people back on topic because he's bringing this up as like a legitimate marketing strategy and they're just blowing it off.
Yeah, I feel like in this scene, Dawn's trying to do work, and everybody's like, we are frat boys.
Right. But also, I think there's like another layer because he keeps trying to figure out women's mysterious wish that we keep ignoring. Like, are we talking about deodorant anymore, Dawn? What are we talking about?
Yeah.
All right, so scene 15 and a half. This is just the guys walking out of the office and walking past Peggy's desk, who is typing away on her IBM, the logo clearly visible. I love that you noticed that. I'm just like involved in the like character drama, and then you're looking at the furniture.
Yeah.
So Kinsey walks past Peggy's desk, said the meeting went poorly, and asks if she wants to buy him lunch. Oh, I like this thought of yours.
Yeah, he seems like the least creepy out of all of them, like the closest to a real person. And then I wrote down is something developing, and then we watch the next scene.
So the next scene is Kinsey and Peggy bonding over an office tour during lunch.
Yeah, transition to someone making sandwiches and wrapping them in wax paper, and this is where we see the cart that we saw earlier. The attendant's name is Samuel. Kinsey makes fun of his jacket, calling it a drape and sad, and Samuel responds telling him he's at work. Like the jacket reminds him that he's at work, and goes, "But you sure can talk."
So maybe Kinsey isn't as awesome as you were thinking.
Yeah, and then the attendant gives Peggy 2 sandwiches, and it costs 60 cents. 60 cents for 2 sandwiches.
The dream.
60 cents. I spent like $17 on lunch probably at some point.
Yeah.
But anyway, Kinsey does not let her pay and instead gives the guy $1, telling him to keep the change.
So Kinsey asks Peggy like if she's figured out how things work around there, and Peggy's version of how the office runs is, I know the copywriters tell the art department what to do, and the account executives tell the copywriters what to do. And then Kinsey is like, no, 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 and breaks it down for her. And while they're walking around the office, he's telling her all these things. So no one tells the writers what to do except for the head of creative, who is Don.
Mm-hmm.
Then they walk by the media department. He says that 90% of where the client's checks go is to the media department. They buy space in newspapers, billboards, TV, and radio. They sell media at a 15% markup, and creative is just window dressing thrown in for free. Then they walk by accounting, and he says that accounting keeps track of the company's money and warns that if you ever see Cooper go in that room, then the company's going down. Then they walk by account management. He says these are prep schoolers who are all good at something, but it's not advertising.
Kinsey uses Pete Campbell as because that's where he works. Example of not being good at advertising, but good at something. And then he imitates Rod Serling from the Twilight Zone when he points at Pete's door and says, "Submit it for your approval," which actually is not a tagline of Rod Serling because it was only used in 3 episodes, but it's known from the show. It's a known phrase from the Twilight Zone, and it's actually been used and reused in Are You Afraid of the Dark? They used it in other episodes, and there's even a 1995 documentary by the title.
Oh, so cute. Yeah, you're right. I totally forgot about that. I used to love that show. But yeah, Peggy doesn't get the reference, which also makes especially more sense if they only used it in 3 episodes. But she tells him she doesn't like science fiction, and he's like, "I'm gonna pretend you didn't say that." He looks genuinely hurt. So Kinsey's a huge dork, and that's cute.
Yeah. And he's also smoking a pipe.
Yeah, he's like one of those guys. I don't know. He mentions, there are women copywriters. I'm not saying anything. My mouth is closed. Really cool transition here with Peggy sitting at her desk in an empty office, and then it fades into the office being busy and filled again with secretaries working on their IBM typewriters. It is a cool transition. You're right.
Yeah. And then Roger knocks on Don's door and just lets himself in and says something about seeing Don not doing his work. Presumably he's thinking sitting on the couch. And Don offers him a drink, and it is 4:30 p.m.
Yep.
They're talking about the Nixon team and Pete Campbell having to be on their team. And I forget who said it, but someone says Pete redefines lack of imagination.
Don brings up what do women want as a transition into talking about psychiatry, because Roger mentioned at dinner the other day that his daughter's in therapy, but he doesn't like being reminded that he mentioned that his daughter has been to therapy.
Yeah, and then the way he explains himself is like he doesn't think that a man should allow his woman's troubles on the hands of another man.
Yeah, like it's keep your private stuff private. And this is why therapy takes so long to get some steam, I think, is because everyone really just thinks like shut up and don't think about it is the way to deal with your feelings.
Yeah, I feel like what Roger's trying to convey here is like if like he's a man and the woman is a woman, and if the woman's unhappy, it's fine. But if the woman talks about being unhappy, then he needs to control his woman.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So bad mid-century.
Yes. So that's the end of that scene. We're back to the Draper house, and the kids are watching People Are Funny, which is the show that Midge brought up.
Yeah, and they're laying down on the floor in front of this great MCMTV set, complete with the spindly legs. And they're like, I don't know, it just feels very old-fashioned to be laying down on the floor watching TV. Like, do people still do that?
I did in the 90s. I don't lay on the floor anymore because I'm an adult. But when I was a kid, I used to lay down on the floor in front of the TV a lot.
See, now because of that, I want to go watch TV laying on the ground, but my TV's high up, so it will hurt my neck because I'm old.
Because we're old.
Don calls his kids Beauty and the Beast, which I think is funny.
It is funny.
And then buys Betty a watch, thinking that another pretty thing will snap Betty out of whatever is making her sad.
Yeah. Betty then goes on, like, she says thank you and looks genuinely grateful for the watch, but then kind of changes the subject into some anxiety she's been having about her daughter. Like, what if during the car accident, Sally had been hurt, like, in her face and had been permanently scarred, and if she no longer had a pretty face, she would go on to have, like, a lonely, sad, miserable life. It basically saying that being disfigured or scarred is worse than dying.
Yeah, I thought that was really odd.
That's sad.
Yeah, but maybe it's because I don't know. I feel like she's like is she like describing her life? Is she lonely and lost, even though she's got everything that she could possibly have or want?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
But
Dawn agrees
whatever,
to send her therapy.
yeah, Dawn picks up on this like underlying sadness in Betty and finally agrees to send her to therapy.
Yeah. And then an abrupt scene change to Dawn sitting on the floor of a hallway, which is outside of Mitch's apartment at 11 a.m. And Dawn brought Betty to the city for therapy and then called in sick. So he's sitting on the floor smoking a cigarette.
Yeah, and so he's talking about dropping Betty off in the city and blah, blah, blah. And Midge is like, don't bring that in here. Don't talk to me about her. It makes me feel cruel.
Yeah, at first I thought she was like, don't bring that in here, as like talking about Dawn being sick, but then talking about the wife makes Mitch feel cruel.
So she
Also, her
knows what
stalking.
she's doing is wrong and she's doing it anyway. Like, I don't.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I noticed.
that's
Yes.
Midge. Not super great moral character in either of these two.
But also, Dawn says, I can't decide if you have everything or you have nothing. And Mitch says, I live in the moment. Nothing is everything.
Yep.
And she also lost her keys and tells Dawn to break into the fire escape for her. And that she had to, quote, spend the night abroad, which I think means another man's house, probably. And Dawn is okay with this?
I don't know. He seems weird. Like, he's kind of possessive of her. Like, he was jealous of where she got the TV from.
Yeah.
But he's also like, yeah, I'll go break into the fire escape and, like, just doesn't think about the fact that she said she had to spend the night abroad. But maybe he's just thinking, like, oh, it could have been a girlfriend's house or.
Nope.
Anyway, scene 20.
Yeah. Abrupt scene change to Sterling Cooper. Really, the camera is looking up from Peggy's desk as Sal is walking up to Dawn's office. Peggy tells him that Dawn's not coming in, and Sal leaves, says, don't tell anyone that I'm here. Like, he leaves the office, but then later on, we see him again in the scene where, like, guys look at her.
Yeah, I think he just meant, like, I wasn't here at Dawn's office. Like, I don't have to work now. This buys me an extra couple hours on whatever I was going to go talk to Dawn about.
And Dawn, and not Dawn. It'd be funny if it was Dawn.
It would be.
Peggy is wearing an awful handkerchief around her neck.
I like the scarf around the neck look. I think we should bring that back, but no one wants to do that.
I just don't think it went with the dress.
Oh yeah.
And I know I'm not the most fashionable person in this podcast. I don't know. I didn't like it.
Anyway, I think it's cute. But anyway, Peggy, in her cute outfit, goes to Kinsey's office and to tell him that she can't go to lunch because Dawn's out that day. And Kinsey tries to convince her, like, no, that means you can go to lunch because your boss isn't here.
Yeah.
But yeah, as soon as he says that, he closes the door and tries to make out with her. So maybe he's not the best of all of them after all.
Maybe.
He's assuming that the reason that she's not into him, like into making out with him in this moment, is because she's with someone else, and immediately assumes it's Dawn.
Yeah, and then he like says like we can just, you know, if you're worried about someone walking into the office, we can just push the couch in front of the door. And was it common to like?
I don't know. They all
office?
have couches in their offices. But anyway, Peggy confirms there is someone else, but she insists it isn't Dawn.
I have thoughts later on. Back at her desk, Peggy begins to cover up her typewriter, which is code for I'm done for the day, according to Joan. Peggy and Joan get into a little fight, but mostly it's because Peggy's upset that everyone keeps hitting on her, and Joan is not taking it seriously at all.
Yeah, Joan says, you're the new girl, and you're not much, so you might as well enjoy it while it lasts.
Wow.
Which is real flippant, but I mean, Joan's been working there long enough that she's probably seen these guys hit on every single secretary and knows it does eventually wear off. Which is, I mean, not the yeah, it's just like a more of this mid-century mindset of just like, don't think about it. Like, if it's bothering you, just like let it go. No one dealing with anything kind of deal.
Yeah. Peggy wants manners from the men, and there's a shot where all the men in the office are walking by her, and literally everyone stares at Peggy as they walk past. It's a really cool camera angle, and it goes from her desk, and then in slow motion with some romantic song playing in the background.
Mm-hmm.
And we have that big reveal.
Yes, so Peggy apparently stole Pete's postcard from his honeymoon out of the break room, and she's keeping it in her desk drawer, and she like opens the drawer to look at it and smile, thinking about
he sucks.
So Peggy then goes to cry in the bathroom, but then she sees someone else crying harder in the bathroom, so she changes her mind, fixes her scarf, and goes back to work.
Yeah, this is my thought that I had earlier. Like, twice in the same episode, we've seen someone cry in the bathroom. We've seen someone ignore the person instead of like being like, oh, are you okay? What's going on? Like, if I saw someone crying at work, let me rephrase. If I saw another adult crying at work, I'm gonna be like, "What's wrong?" If I see another student, of course, I'm gonna also take care of the student. But I'm not gonna walk into the student's bathroom because I don't do that. I use a staff one,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't. And I'm like, why do so many people cry in this office?
Mm-hmm.
Women, because we haven't seen any guys cry.
No.
I don't know. I was just like, be human. Be like, are you okay? Can I get you something? Like, talk to me.
Yeah. But no, she's seen how Joan behaves in an office. She's seen how the crying women behave in the office, and she's decided to be more like Joan.
Joan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, abrupt scene change. And we get to the doctor's office with Betty lying on a couch. And she's clearly nervous and says that people must come to visit the therapist because of the bomb. And saying it's a common nightmare. And she must be referring to the atomic bomb and the nuclear arms race going on because, again, 1960s, Cold War.
And she says that her mother always told me it wasn't polite to talk about yourself, and mentions that she just passed away recently. Therapist is basically just letting her ramble and is providing no insight at all. She asks if they can smoke, and he just slides an ashtray over silently.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of therapy is this? I guess he's just letting her talk.
I think mid-century therapy. I think that's what it is.
And Betty says something like, "We're all so lucky to be here." Like,
Yeah.
I guess about the bomb again, or...
I guess so.
But it doesn't really sound like she's making any breakthroughs or anything.
Yeah. We get another abrupt scene change to Dawn sleeping in Mitch's apartment, and it's around 7:30 p.m. And we know that because Mitch says it's 7:30. Because she's about to leave for a poetry reading.
But then Don finally realizes his deodorant ad, and he comes up with the tagline, "What do women want? Any excuse to get closer."
Yes, and we get a fade transition into a fancy and classy restaurant in the city where Betty and Don are sitting on a circular two-person booth, which has no chair on the outside of the booth. So I don't know what the proper etiquette would be in this one, because the guy should sit in the chair and have the back to the restaurant, and there's no chair.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, are they sitting like where Betty is like facing the restaurant and he's off to the side? Or are they facing each other?
They're both facing the center of the table.
Oh, interesting.
They're both facing the restaurant. But I don't know what Amy Vanderbilt would say about this. Anyway.
They mention what they've ordered, and I find this interesting because I love food. So Betty gets the filet of sole with cream spinach and au gratin potatoes, is how they pronounce it.
They pronounce it au gratin. And I'm like, what? It's au gratin.
And she asks for tomato juice to start and a vodka gimlet. And Don gets the goulash and an old-fashioned.
Yes.
And goulash to me doesn't seem fancy enough for the restaurant that they're eating in, but who knows?
I don't know. I feel like Don is only fancy around other men to like keep up a front. I have this like theory that Don is actually not does not aspire to actually be fancy rich person. He's just doing it because that's what society wants him to be. I feel like Don would be perfectly happy just bouncing from woman's apartment to woman's apartment.
Maybe.
But that's just me. He is, however, He is, however, wearing a watch which looks like, we only see it for like half a second, but I like watches, especially mid-century watches. And it looks like a Longines automatic. Just the color scheme looks different because the only Longines automatics I've seen in that same style have a silver face, and this one is a silver or white face with a black outer face. But it's really cool mid-century look. I would love to get one of those. I have a 1960s Longines, and I would like more.
Cool.
Yeah. That's it.
Well spotted. Yeah, Dawn asks about her day and asks about therapy, but they don't really talk about it. She does seem like she's in a good mood, though, like it helped. And they're both actually in a good mood.
But did it help, or did it help because she thinks it's supposed to help?
Maybe. Yeah, because I wouldn't think that helped at all, unless she just, like, was happy to have someone that she could just talk to.
Yeah.
Like, maybe she just doesn't have anyone she could talk to, so it might have actually been helping. But anyway, they're both in a good mood, and Dawn is joking about funny names in the phone book, completely changing the subject. One he brings up in particular is Pat McGroin.
Yeah.
Apparently, this is why they're starting to charge for putting your name in the phone book, because too many people were putting in joke names. That would have been something to Google, but I forgot to Google that.
Well, people are giving aliases and nicknames to, Dawn says, to Ma Bell, which is a nickname for AT&T, which dominated until the 1980s.
Oh, Good to know.
Yeah.
But anyway, they look like they're having a lot of fun at dinner, so it's a good day.
And we get the last scene change of the episode into the entry hall of the Draper house, which they enter from the front door and not the garage.
Yeah, good point.
Or the kitchen door if the garage is unattached. Like, I don't know. Like, well, my house is attached, but my parents' house, the garage is in the back.
You know,
So,
when
like,
he came home from dinner, when he came home the other day and the kids were eating dinner, he came in through the kitchen door. But this day, coming home from dinner, they went in through the front.
Yeah, it's not like they took an Uber.
But anyway, Don tells Betty he'll be right up, so she's going up to bed, and then he goes into his office to make a phone call.
And there's a nice, beautiful shot of a wonderful rotary dial phone, and then another device that has a rotary dial on it. And I could not find. I did a lot of research trying to figure out what that device was, and I could not figure it out. But Don Draper's phone number is 433-4779. It's written on the phone.
No area code yet.
Nope. I wonder when those became a thing.
Then the big reveal is he's calling the therapist, a phone call that the therapist was expecting, because he doesn't sound surprised at all, to hear from Don. And this is just so that the therapist can tell him everything that Betty said in their session. The therapist says, she's a very anxious young woman. I think you're doing the right thing. And that's all we hear.
Yeah. And then the scene ends with a zooming out shot of the darkening kitchen as Don closes the door to his office. And we have a timeline error.
Yeah, so I guess we're kind of establishing now that Matt Weiner's going to choose a song in the end credits that he thinks is relevant to the plot more so than it being historically accurate, because the end credit song this episode is The Great Divide by the Cardigans, which is a song from 1996, which must have been chosen for its lyrical significance more so than the time period it comes from.
Yes. And that is episode 2, Ladies' Room, from Mad Men.
All right, so we got some of your thoughts. What are your overall thoughts? How was episode 2? What do you think?
I like it. I have thoughts about characters because I feel bad for Betty because she's not happy. I also feel like she's like shoving it down, like trying to act like 1950s, 60s housewife, and like Dawn is very much like, stop talking about feelings because you're a woman. You don't have no feelings, right? And then we have Peggy, who's in love with Pete.
Yeah, like he's literally out on his honeymoon, and he sends this postcard from his honeymoon, and she's held on to that as a romantic memento. Like,
yeah, and in the card there was something about being wet and because of the Niagara Falls, but he's not saying that they got wet because of the falls.
Yeah,
like
it's a dirty joke about his wife, and she's still holding on to it like it's this like sweet thing. Like, oh, this is from Pete. Like, yeah, poor Peggy.
Yeah, it was not sent to her. He don't give a crap.
So at the end of the last episode, we tried to figure out what your favorite character was in that episode. Do you have... I think your last episode favorite was you liked the switchboard ladies, who we did not see at all in this episode.
We did not see today. I'm torn. Okay, I want to say like my real answer would be Betty in this episode because I just feel bad for her. But in reality, I feel like I should say it's the crying woman in the bathroom because I was like, just do something to help her.
Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, this was a very Betty-centric episode, and I love Betty episodes. So,
yeah, it's very much not like we could have done the entire episode without Peggy, and it would have been fine. Like nothing would have changed. Which and I say that because not having seen the show, my interpretation of what the show is going to be about has to do a lot more with Peggy and Dawn than any other character.
Yeah, that's true. So, they were in a lot of like publicity shots together.
But those are my thoughts.
I think Betty is the standout character in this episode. Also, if I'm just picking my favorite character in this episode, it is also Betty. Though I do really like Francine. She is she's like, I guess, a next door neighbor or something. She comes over a lot, and they just chat in their curlers in the kitchen a lot, and I just really love that dynamic because that's something very mid-century that I don't think people do anymore.
Yeah, just walk over.
Yeah.
Anyway, it looks like with that we have landed today's account. Thank you all for listening today. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show and tell a friend.
You can also follow us on YouTube and Instagram at MCL Podcast. Instagram is the best place to send us feedback and episode suggestions. Send us a DM anytime. You can also contact us through the Send Us a Text Message feature in the show notes.
Yep, so send us some fan mail. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Bye!
Thank you for listening to Mid-Century Living. Please subscribe, tell your friends, and leave a review. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at MCL Podcast. See you next Friday.